welcome to another video. I know what you must be thinking. What is this? What's he here to show us this week? This one's gonna be a little bit different, so it's not just another one of the 24-hour challenges. This is actually a game that I'm trying to make, and I want to cover it. So, as a brief overview, it's gonna be essentially a from the ground up built for multiplayer, beat 'em up, roguelike kind of game with an isometric perspective and a heavy emphasis on just kind of looking and feeling good to play without adding too much complexity. I feel like Collateral is definitely a fantastic game, but sometimes it suffers from the complexity, and so I wanted to try to also, in the meantime, make something that is just a little bit different, a little bit easier to understand, and just like kind of pick up and play. And this is the first thing that came to mind for me because it's something I've always wanted to build, and yeah, this is my attempt at it. Alright guys, so let's just get right into it. First thing I want to cover is the occluder. So why and what is that? Well, it's this. So when you go under something, it's going to just generate this weird halo around your character. It obscures your vision a bit. It looks cool, it's a cool effect, and it lets you see through. The reason for building this is just because a lot of isometric games are just very flat. Think like Vampire Survivors, Potato, or anything of that sort. Generally not a lot of verticality because you can't see when you're below things. This should solve that. Should be pretty good. I'm happy with how it's turned out. And yeah, that's about it. It should allow for me to design things in a more meaningful way with more verticality than you would normally expect from a game that looks like this. Yeah, next thing I want to cover, you've kind of already been seeing it, is a traversal. This is kind of not handmade, it's from Unreal Engine, but it looks pretty good, and I intend on using it pretty well to kind of give players cool like parkour sections or things to do, and just modes of traversal. So I expect to be a lot more focused on how levels look and just giving players more to do to kind of like make the gameplay feel more cinematic. But yeah, that's traversal. Next thing I want to cover is animation-driven combat. What does that mean? Well, there's two major design philosophies. There's plenty of others. I'm not presenting this as a dichotomy, but essentially two that you could see very clearly in my games. One would be event-driven gameplay, which is essentially like you have things like colliders or boxes or events, timers, gates, and all of these things basically trigger different things happening. Obviously, there's going to be a little bit of event-driven stuff in this game as well, but a majority of logic will happen based on the animation that's playing, is essentially what I am trying to convey, right? So let's look at an example real quick before I show you what it looks like. This is a simple punch animation. You'll notice there's a bunch of stuff happening here. I can go into details, but I won't for the sake of brevity. I'm just going to give kind of like overviews of what's happening. So this is called an animation notify window. And what that does is it basically just says from frame 0 to frame 15, it's going to be doing something called motion movement, which basically just takes the animation and it moves the root. So the actual bone that every other bone branches from, the root of the hierarchy of the mesh, and it moves it to a suitable location that I tell it to move it to. Then there's a node to apply damage. There's a combo window, which basically just means any inputs provided during that time regarding attacks are not going to just play a new attack, they're going to queue up the next attack. So if I do light attack right away, I'm spamming it, it's not just going to make my character freeze up, it's just going to take the next input and say, hey, once this attack is done, play another light attack. Then there's just some effect stuff. So this is a trail, it essentially just creates a trail and attaches it to the left hand. And then there's hit effects, which you can see there. It just plays a sound and it generates that hit effect. You put all that together alongside with some other logic that honestly isn't worth covering, and you get this. A pretty good looking punch. Let's look at that in slow motion, just so you can see it better. Boom. And you get a bunch of different punches. I'm gonna stop right there, because I need to cover what a finisher is before I show you guys a finisher. So, there's basically one other form of attack. Yeah, there's heavy attacks as well, but they function identically to light attacks. They just deal more damage and they're generally slower. But now let's look at what an execution looks like, right? So this is a finisher. If you notice, it's not just a single attack, it's actually a chain of attacks, and there's two additional logic things here. So there's an action camera this thing is actually something I'm very proud of getting to work, which is essentially just this camera that's attached to your character at all times. And it's on a string arm, so it basically just like, it tries to give you a cinematic view of your character, which would look like this. This is just a debug thing I've set up, but essentially this is what it looks like, right? It's just gonna slowly pan around your character at whatever speed I tell it to based on the animation notification, and it should allow for you to just get like a cool view of your combat or like your finishers. So that's what an action camera is. Hopefully that makes sense. And then the other thing you have is a node that just ominously says play finisher. What that just does is just tells the enemy to play the finisher. Now, why do we need that? Why don't we just use the hit stops like we do with regular attacks? Well, it's because this is a 3-hit combo. So if I just make the enemy's mesh just kind of have a seizure during this whole thing, it looks pretty shitty because it's not just like a half a second or a quarter of a second. It's like a whole second. So what this does is it basically just tells the enemy to play montage, and that looks like this. So the finisher is, if I recall correctly, hook to the body, rear hook to the head, and then a wheel kick. And so you can see that here. Boom, she gets hit in the body, hook to the head from the rear side, and then boom, wheel kick, and she's out for the game. So that's what that looks like. And now you're like, well, let's see it in action. So let's see it. I also recognize that I didn't cover the hit stops, so I'm just going to show that here real quick. I'm going to put it in slow-mo once again, just so you can see it better. But what you're looking for is for my character's mesh to kind of pause on impact, and for the enemy's mesh to also pause and shake a bit and change colors, which you can see right here. It just allows for the impacts to feel a little bit better. So now let's unslow-mo it so you can see the hit stops in full speed. So that's what a full speed hit stop looks like, right? And now let's look at the finisher in slow motion. So this is going to demonstrate the action camera where the perspective changes so you can see the combo better, as well as kind of both the animations playing at the same time. So you can see it happening again with all the effects and everything in place. It goes very well. The action camera looks very cool. And then it's in game, it's not going to play every time. Currently, I have it set up to play every time just for demonstration sakes. But I think overall, the gameplay looks very fluid and very good. Other than that, the only thing left to cover is the fact that it is a fully multiplayer game. So you'll have noticed there's 3 of me every time I'm playing this. That's because of the fact that it's multiplayer. So, oh wait, before I start that, actually, I want to show you guys, just so I'm not a liar. I've set the network emulation to be bad, which means everyone is going to have 100 to 200 ping and 5% packet loss. And this is really just to demonstrate the fact that I've actually put a lot of effort into minimizing the amount of RPCs I use and make this a very client-side authoritative game, just because it's not really a game where we care too much about if people are cheating or not. So I am going to play as client 2, which I can't do because I didn't click it. Okay, so I'm going to play as client 2. You can see that here. I'm client 2. First thing you're going to notice is on the other 2 screens, so top right screen is the one I'm looking at. It's super fluid. It doesn't look bad at all. But on the other screens, it looks a little janky. Why is that? Well, that's because as opposed to like other games, which are server-side authoritative, where essentially if I move too far away from what the server expects me to be at, the server just rubber bands me back, right? You could see this. You could think about all of your favorite multiplayer games to play. A lot of them probably have a lot of rubber banding issues if you're playing with a poor connection. And I've essentially solved that by saying the server will accept whatever the person's computer says. So if my computer says that I am standing over here, the server is just going to try to interpolate my position to there because it believes me. That's what client-side authoritative means. And what that allows for is for the gameplay to feel very smooth on my machine without looking too bad on everyone else's machines. And yeah, so even the same thing applies for combat. So like if I'm going here and I'm putting inputs in, you'll notice they're firing off immediately. Everything is playing as expected, just with delays on the other people's sides. One thing to note is you'll notice the damage takes a little bit to process sometimes. It always will process because it's a reliable RPC, but the reason it takes a little while to process is because you can't do damage just client side. If all of the damage I apply is only client side, then the other players would never know I killed anything, right? So that's unfortunately not something you can omit the server from as just like a fundamental rule. But other than that, everything is basically client-side authoritative, and so it allows for very smooth gameplay, even if you're not under the best connection. That's fantastic because this isn't a game that's going to be running on dedicated servers. It's going to be running peer-to-peer, which means reasonably you can expect to have a little bit of ping. I don't imagine there's going to be a lot of people regularly playing with, once again, bad connections of 5% packet loss and 100 to 200 ping on the client and server side, but just in case, you've seen it now. The gameplay looks good, even in those circumstances. Thank you so much for tuning in, watching the video. If you guys have any thoughts about the project or just general feedback that you would like to provide, I'm very happy to hear it. It's very early on, so I'd love to get your ideas and takes on it. And yeah, that's about it. I'm gonna play some just kind of like random gameplay or just like, B-roll footage of how the game looks currently, just so you guys can see it a bit more, and I'll see you guys in the next one.